Sarah Martinez pulled her hair back into a messy bun as she walked through the automatic doors of San Diego General Hospital.
Let's
The morning
move
sun
out.
cast long shadows across the parking lot, but she barely noticed. After 12 years as an emergency room nurse, she had learned to compartmentalize the chaos of her work life from everything else. Today felt different, though. There was an unusual tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. The emergency department buzzed with its typical controlled chaos. Paramedics wheeled in patients, doctors shouted orders, and the constant beeping of monitors created a symphony she knew by heart. Sarah had seen it all during her career: car accidents, heart attacks, gunshot wounds, and everything in between. She prided herself on remaining calm under pressure, a skill that had earned her the respect of both colleagues and patients. As she clocked in and received her assignment, Sarah noticed several men in suits talking quietly with the hospital administrator near the main desk. They wore dark sunglasses despite being indoors and carried themselves with a military bearing that was unmistakable. One of them kept glancing around the emergency department as if assessing potential threats. Sarah had seen enough military personnel come through the hospital to recognize the type, but something about their presence seemed more serious than usual. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the head of emergency medicine, approached Sarah with an unusual expression on her face. They had worked together for 8 years, and Sarah had never seen her supervisor look quite so perplexed. Dr. Walsh was typically direct and no-nonsense, but today she seemed almost hesitant as she spoke. The first unusual patient arrived at exactly 10:30 in the morning. He was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with short-cropped hair and the lean, muscular build of someone who maintained peak physical condition. What struck Sarah immediately was not just his obvious military background, but the way he carried himself despite being injured. He had been brought in by civilian paramedics, but the paperwork was oddly sparse. No emergency contacts, no detailed medical history, and an address that seemed deliberately vague. The young man had sustained what appeared to be shrapnel wounds to his left arm and shoulder. The injuries were consistent with an explosive device, but when Sarah asked what happened, he simply said there had been an accident during training. His answers were polite but minimal, and he seemed more concerned about not being a burden than about his own pain. Sarah had treated enough soldiers to know that this level of stoicism, while admirable, often masked more serious trauma. As Sarah cleaned and dressed his wounds, she noticed several things that didn't add up. The shrapnel pattern suggested he had been very close to whatever exploded, yet he showed no signs of concussion or other blast-related injuries. His hands, while calloused from obvious hard work, bore small scars that spoke of extensive combat training. Most tellingly, he wore a simple gold band on a chain around his neck, a wedding ring that he clearly couldn't risk wearing on his finger during dangerous work. The young man's name was listed as Michael Thompson, though something in his eyes suggested this might not be his real identity. Throughout the treatment, he remained alert and watchful, occasionally glancing toward the windows and exits in a way that reminded Sarah of a caged animal constantly planning escape routes. When she asked about pain levels, he consistently underreported what was obviously significant discomfort. During the medical examination, Sarah discovered additional details that painted a picture of someone involved in extremely dangerous work. Small puncture scars on his arms suggested extensive vaccination protocols, the kind typically required for deployment to exotic locations. His muscle development was asymmetrical in ways consistent with someone who regularly carried heavy equipment on one side of his body. Most notably, he had a small tattoo on his inner wrist that he quickly covered when he noticed Sarah looking at it. The second patient arrived an hour later under similar mysterious circumstances. This one was older, perhaps in his 30s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent considerable time in harsh environments. He had sustained what appeared to be a knife wound to his thigh, though he claimed it happened during a camping accident. Like the first patient, his paperwork was minimal and his answers were carefully guarded. What made this case even more intriguing was the way the two men interacted when they caught sight of each other across the emergency department. There was a brief moment of eye contact followed by an almost imperceptible nod, the kind of silent communication that comes from extensive training and shared experiences. Neither acknowledged knowing the other when questioned, but their body language told a different story. Throughout the morning, Sarah found herself treating a total of 4 men, all between the ages of 22 and 35, all with similar injuries that supposedly occurred during separate training accidents or outdoor mishaps. Each man displayed the same characteristics: exceptional physical condition, minimal personal information, careful answers to questions, and that distinctive military bearing that comes from elite training. The injuries were all non-life-threatening, but significant enough to require professional medical attention. What truly caught Sarah's attention was the pattern in their injuries and the timing of their arrivals. Each man arrived approximately 1 hour after the previous one, as if their visits had been carefully coordinated to avoid overlap. The types of injuries: shrapnel wounds, knife cuts, what appeared to be rope burns on one man's hands, and minor blast-related trauma, suggested they had all been involved in some kind of high-risk training exercise or operation. The men in suits remained in the hospital throughout the morning, sometimes speaking quietly into small communication devices and occasionally stepping outside for private phone calls. Sarah noticed that they seemed particularly interested in the status of her 4 mysterious patients, though they never approached her directly or interfered with the medical care being provided. As the day progressed, Sarah began to piece together clues that suggested these were not ordinary patients. Their injuries, while treated as separate incidents, seemed to form a pattern when considered together. The timing of their arrivals, their similar backgrounds, and the presence of what were obviously federal agents painted a picture of something much more significant than training accidents. The most revealing moment came when she overheard 2 of the patients speaking quietly to each other when they thought no one was listening. Their conversation was brief and cryptic, but she caught references to extraction points, communication protocols, and timeline adjustments, terminology that had nothing to do with camping or training exercises gone wrong. Dr. Walsh pulled Sarah aside during her lunch break to discuss the unusual morning. The hospital administrator had received several phone calls from federal agencies requesting updates on the status of specific patients, though no official paperwork had been filed. The requests were polite but insistent, and there was an underlying sense that cooperation was not optional. By early afternoon, all 4 men had been treated and were ready for discharge. Their injuries, while requiring professional care, were not serious enough to warrant overnight observation. However, instead of leaving individually as most patients would, they remained in separate areas of the emergency department, apparently waiting for something or someone. Sarah's shift was scheduled to end at 7 in the evening, but as the day wore on, she found herself increasingly curious about her mysterious patients. The combination of their obvious military training, carefully coordinated arrivals, similar injury patterns, and the presence of federal agents suggested she had stumbled into something far beyond routine medical care. The afternoon brought no additional mysterious patients, but the tension in the emergency department remained palpable. The men in suits continued their vigilant presence, and Sarah's 4 patients remained in the hospital despite being medically cleared for discharge. Whatever was happening, it was clear that her day was far from over. As her official shift neared its end, Sarah completed her paperwork and prepared to hand over her patients to the evening nurse. She had no way of knowing that her most extraordinary experience was yet to come, or that her years of dedicated service were about to be acknowledged in a way she never could have imagined. The events of the morning had been unusual enough, but they were merely the prelude to something that would change her perspective on her work and her country forever. Sarah was gathering her personal belongings from her locker when Dr. Walsh approached her with an expression that mixed confusion with something that looked almost like awe. The conversation that followed would prove to be unlike any she had experienced in her 12-year nursing career. Dr. Walsh explained that she had received multiple phone calls throughout the afternoon from various federal agencies, all inquiring about the status of Sarah's 4 patients and specifically requesting information about the quality of care they had received. The requests were unusual not just in their frequency, but in their specificity. The callers wanted to know details about Sarah's bedside manner, her professionalism, and her discretion in handling sensitive cases. Dr. Walsh had been asked to provide a detailed assessment of Sarah's performance that day, including her ability to maintain confidentiality and her overall competence as a medical professional. These were not typical follow-up inquiries for routine emergency room visits. What made the situation even more intriguing was that the hospital administrator had been contacted directly by someone claiming to represent a classified military operation. The caller had been polite but firm in explaining that the day's events fell under matters of national security and that all staff involved should be prepared for a formal debriefing. The administrator had been given specific instructions about maintaining the confidentiality of the morning's events. As Sarah listened to this explanation, she began to understand that her suspicions about the 4 patients had been correct. They were clearly involved in some kind of classified military operation, and her role in treating them had not gone unnoticed by those in charge. The realization was both thrilling and somewhat intimidating. She had always taken pride in her work, but the idea that her actions might be under scrutiny by federal agents was a new experience. Dr. Walsh continued by explaining that Sarah had been specifically requested to remain available after her shift ended. The request had come through official channels and was framed as a matter of national importance. While the hospital couldn't force her to stay beyond her scheduled hours, the implication was that her cooperation would be appreciated by some very important people. Sarah agreed to stay, driven by curiosity and a sense of patriotic duty. The first indication that something significant was about to happen came at exactly 7:15 in the evening. Sarah had finished her paperwork and was waiting in the staff break room when she noticed increased activity in the hospital's main lobby. Through the window, she could see several black vehicles pulling up to the main entrance. These were not ordinary cars, but rather the kind of heavily armored SUVs typically used for high-security transportation. The men who emerged from these vehicles were unlike the suited agents who had been present throughout the day. These new arrivals wore what appeared to be casual civilian clothing, but their bearing and coordination immediately identified them as highly trained military personnel. They moved with the fluid precision of a unit that had worked together extensively, and each man seemed to be constantly aware of his surroundings and the positions of his teammates. Sarah watched through the break room window as these men entered the hospital and immediately took positions that provided clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. Their deployment was subtle but thorough, creating a security perimeter that would allow them to monitor and control access to the building without alarming civilian patients and staff. The coordination required for such a deployment spoke to extensive training and significant resources. One of the new arrivals approached the main desk and spoke quietly with the evening administrator. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that this was clearly the leader of the group. He was tall and lean, with graying hair that suggested he was in his 40s, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. His conversation with the administrator was brief and professional, but there was no doubt about who was in charge of the situation. Dr. Walsh appeared at the break room door and informed Sarah that she was being requested in Conference Room B, a space typically used for administrative meetings and family consultations. The doctor's expression suggested she was as puzzled by the day's events as Sarah was, but she also seemed impressed by whatever she had learned about the identity of their visitors. As they walked toward the conference room, Dr. Walsh mentioned that the hospital had been asked to clear the room and ensure complete privacy for the meeting. The hallway leading to Conference Room B had been subtly secured by the newcomers. 2 men stood at strategic positions, ostensibly reading magazines or checking their phones, but their positioning allowed them to observe anyone approaching the meeting area. Their civilian clothes couldn't disguise their military bearing, and Sarah noticed that each man wore an earpiece for communication. The level of security being employed for a simple meeting was far beyond anything she had previously experienced. As Sarah approached the conference room, she found herself growing increasingly nervous. The events of the day had already been unusual enough, but the arrival of what were obviously elite military personnel suggested that the situation was far more significant than she had initially realized. She tried to imagine what kind of operation could have resulted in 4 injured servicemen requiring treatment at a civilian hospital, and what her role in their care might mean to those in charge. The conference room had been arranged differently than usual. Instead of the typical boardroom setup, the chairs had been arranged in a more informal circle, with one chair positioned to face the others. A table held bottles of water and what appeared to be official documents. The lighting had been adjusted to create a more comfortable atmosphere, but the overall effect was still distinctly formal and serious. Sarah was asked to wait in the conference room for a few minutes while the final preparations were made. During this time, she noticed several details that reinforced her growing understanding of the situation's importance. The documents on the table bore official seals and classifications that she couldn't read from her position, but their presence suggested this was far more than a casual debriefing. Someone had taken the time to prepare a formal presentation or ceremony. The waiting period gave Sarah time to reflect on the day's events and consider what might be coming next. She thought about the 4 men she had treated, their obvious training and dedication, and the injuries they had sustained in service to their country. Whatever operation they had been involved in, it was clear that they had put themselves at considerable risk, and she felt honored to have played a role in their care. At exactly 7:30, the door to the conference room opened, and Sarah's perspective on her day changed completely. The first person to enter was one of the 4 men she had treated earlier, Michael Thompson, though she was beginning to suspect that wasn't his real name. He was now dressed in clean civilian clothes and looked remarkably better despite the injuries she had treated just hours earlier. Following Michael were his 3 teammates, also cleaned up and dressed in civilian attire. Seeing them together as a unit rather than as individual patients gave Sarah a new appreciation for what she had witnessed that morning. These were clearly elite operators who had been through something significant together, and their presence in the conference room suggested that her role in their story was not yet finished. The final person to enter the room was the tall, gray-haired man who had taken charge upon arrival. As he stepped into the conference room and closed the door behind him, Sarah noticed that he carried a folder containing what appeared to be official papers. His demeanor was serious but not unfriendly, and there was something in his expression that suggested respect rather than interrogation. What happened next would transform Sarah's understanding of the impact her work could have beyond the walls of the hospital. The gray-haired man introduced himself with a rank and unit designation that immediately identified him as a very senior officer in the United States Navy's Special Operations community. His presence, combined with that of the 4 men she had treated, painted a picture of an operation significant enough to warrant the attention of the highest levels of military command. The officer began by thanking Sarah for her service to the 4 men under his command. His words were formal but sincere, and he explained that her professionalism and discretion had been noted and appreciated by those responsible for operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Sarah was beginning to understand that she had stumbled into a world where her nursing skills intersected with matters of national security. As the meeting continued, Sarah learned that the 4 men were indeed Navy SEALs who had been involved in a classified operation that had required immediate medical attention upon their return. The decision to seek treatment at a civilian hospital rather than a military facility had been made for operational security reasons, and Sarah's care had been an essential part of their mission's success. The revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of her profession and its potential impact. She had always known that her work mattered, but the idea that her nursing skills could play a role in protecting national security was both humbling and inspiring. The formal recognition of her contribution to their mission was something she had never imagined possible when she first chose to become a nurse. Commander James Patterson, as the senior officer had introduced himself, began to share details about the operation that had brought the 4 SEALs to Sarah's emergency room. While he couldn't reveal specific operational details due to classification requirements, he explained that the team had been involved in a high-priority mission that had required them to infiltrate and extract valuable intelligence from what he described as a location of significant strategic importance to national security. The mission had been planned for months and involved coordination between multiple government agencies. The 4 SEALs had been selected for their specific skill sets and their proven ability to operate in extremely dangerous environments. What made this particular operation unique was the level of precision required and the narrow window of opportunity they had been given to complete their objectives. Commander Patterson explained that the team had successfully completed their primary mission, but had encountered unexpected resistance during their extraction phase. The injuries Sarah had treated were the result of their having to fight their way out of a compound where they had been discovered by hostile forces. The shrapnel wounds, knife cuts, and Other trauma she had addressed were souvenirs of a firefight that had lasted nearly 2 hours as they fought to reach their extraction point. Michael Thompson, whose real name was Petty Officer First Class David Chun, had sustained his injuries while providing covering fire for his teammates during their escape. The shrapnel that Sarah had carefully removed from his arm and shoulder had come from an improvised explosive device that had detonated less than 10 feet from his position. His decision to remain in position despite the danger had allowed his teammates to reach safety and had probably saved their lives. The second SEAL, introduced as Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Rivera, had received his knife wound while engaging in hand-to-hand combat with an enemy fighter who had attempted to prevent their escape. The wound had been deliberately inflicted in a non-vital area by Rivera himself, as part of a tactical maneuver that had allowed him to gain the upper hand in the fight. His quick thinking and willingness to accept injury in order to neutralize a threat had been instrumental in the team's successful extraction. The third team member, Petty Officer Second Class James Washington, had sustained rope burns on his hands and arms while rappelling down the side of a building under fire. The burns that Sarah had treated were the result of his having to descend faster than safety protocols normally allowed in order to avoid enemy fire from above. His actions had not only saved his own life, but had also allowed him to reach the ground in time to provide covering fire for the final team member's descent. The fourth SEAL, Petty Officer First Class Robert Kim, had been injured by debris from an explosion while he worked to disable security systems that would have prevented their escape. The minor blast-related trauma that Sarah had treated had occurred when he deliberately positioned himself between an exploding security console and valuable intelligence materials that needed to be preserved. His sacrifice of personal safety to protect mission-critical information had ensured that their dangerous operation would provide maximum benefit to national security. Commander Patterson's account of the mission painted a picture of extraordinary courage and professionalism under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Each member of the team had made decisions that prioritized the mission's success and their teammates' safety over their own well-being. The injuries that had brought them to Sarah's emergency room were badges of honor earned in service to their country. What made the story even more remarkable was the revelation that this had been the team's fourth high-risk mission in as many months. They were part of an elite unit within the SEAL community that specialized in operations requiring the highest levels of skill and discretion. The demands placed on these men were extraordinary, and their willingness to repeatedly put themselves in harm's way for the greater good was both inspiring and humbling. Sarah listened in amazement as Commander Patterson explained how the team's training and preparation had made the difference between success and failure in their recent mission. The years of physical conditioning, technical training, and psychological preparation had been tested under the most extreme circumstances, and each man had performed at the highest levels of military excellence. The commander then shifted his focus to Sarah's role in the team's story. He explained that her professionalism, skill, and discretion had been essential to the mission's final success. The quality of care she had provided had ensured that all 4 team members would be ready to return to active duty without any long-term complications from their injuries. Her ability to treat their wounds effectively while maintaining appropriate confidentiality had been noticed and appreciated at the highest levels of command. More importantly, Commander Patterson revealed that Sarah's interactions with the team members had provided valuable intelligence about their psychological state following the traumatic events of their mission. Her observations about their demeanor, their responses to questions, and their overall condition had been carefully noted and had contributed to assessments about their readiness for future operations. The psychological impact of high-stress military operations was something that the SEAL community took very seriously, and Sarah's professional assessment of the team's mental state had been as valuable as her medical care. Her years of experience treating trauma patients had given her insights into the signs of post-traumatic stress and other psychological injuries that might not be immediately apparent to military personnel. Sarah learned that her nursing notes from the day had been reviewed by military psychologists who specialized in special operations personnel. Her detailed observations about each team member's behavior, responses, and overall presentation had provided valuable data points for ongoing assessments of their mental health and operational readiness. The revelation that her routine nursing documentation had played a role in protecting the psychological well-being of these elite warriors was both surprising and gratifying. Sarah had always been thorough in her record-keeping, but she had never imagined that her notes might be reviewed by specialists who used them to ensure the continued effectiveness and safety of special operations personnel. Commander Patterson then presented Sarah with a formal letter of commendation that recognized her contribution to the success of a classified military operation. While the letter couldn't specify the details of the mission due to security requirements, it formally acknowledged that her professional skills and discretion had directly supported operations critical to national security. The letter was signed by officials whose names Sarah recognized from news coverage of national security matters. The presentation of the commendation was accompanied by an explanation of its significance. Very few civilians ever received formal recognition for their role in supporting classified military operations, and the decision to present Sarah with this honor had been made at the highest levels of the Department of Defense. Her nursing skills had intersected with matters of national security in a way that deserved official recognition. In addition to the formal commendation, Sarah was presented with a special coin that bore the insignia of the Naval Special Warfare Command. Commander Patterson explained that these coins were given only to individuals who had made significant contributions to the SEAL community's mission. The coin represented not just recognition of her professional skills, but acceptance into an extended family of people who supported the most elite warriors in the American military. The 4 SEALs each took turns thanking Sarah personally for the care she had provided. Their words were simple but heartfelt, and it was clear that her professionalism and compassion had made a significant impression on them during what had been a difficult and stressful day. They explained that her calm and competent demeanor had been exactly what they needed as they processed the events of their mission. Petty Officer Chun, whom Sarah had known as Michael Thompson, was particularly eloquent in his gratitude. He explained that her gentle touch while treating his wounds and her respectful questions about his condition had reminded him of the humanity that existed beyond the violent world he often inhabited. Her care had been a bridge back to the normal world that he and his teammates were fighting to protect. The meeting concluded with Commander Patterson explaining that Sarah's involvement in the day's events would need to remain confidential indefinitely. The operational security requirements that had brought the team to a civilian hospital in the first place meant that any public discussion of what had occurred could potentially compromise future operations and put other service members at risk. Sarah was asked to sign several documents acknowledging her understanding of the confidentiality requirements and confirming that she would not discuss the details of what she had learned with anyone not authorized to receive such information. The paperwork was routine for anyone who had been exposed to classified information, but signing it made the extraordinary nature of her day feel even more real. As the formal portion of the meeting ended, the atmosphere in the conference room became more relaxed and personal. The SEALs shared stories about their families and their hopes for the future, revealing the human side that existed beneath their warrior personas. Sarah learned about their children, their spouses, and their dreams for life after their military service ended. These personal conversations helped Sarah understand that the men she had treated were not just elite warriors, but also fathers, husbands, and sons who had made extraordinary sacrifices in service to their country. Their willingness to share these personal details with her was a sign of respect and trust that she found deeply moving. As the evening progressed, Commander Patterson revealed one final surprise that would cement Sarah's connection to the SEAL community for years to come. He explained that her exemplary performance during the day's events had led to her being offered a unique opportunity to continue supporting special operations personnel in a more formal capacity. The Naval Medical Center San Diego had a specialized program that provided advanced trauma training to civilian medical professionals who might be called upon to treat special operations personnel in emergency situations. The program was highly selective, requiring not just exceptional medical skills, but also the highest levels of security clearance and personal integrity. Sarah's performance that day had identified her as an ideal candidate for this exclusive program. The training program would involve intensive instruction in treating the types of wounds and trauma commonly encountered by special operations personnel. This included advanced techniques for treating gunshot wounds, blast injuries, chemical exposure, and the psychological trauma that often accompanied such physical injuries. The program was taught by military medical personnel who had extensive experience treating combat injuries in the field. More importantly, graduation from the program would place Sarah on a list of civilian medical professionals who could be called upon to provide emergency treatment to special operations personnel when military medical facilities were not available or when operational security required the use of civilian hospitals. This was an honor that very few nurses ever received, and it would represent a significant expansion of her ability to serve her country. Commander Patterson explained that Sarah's acceptance into the program would require extensive background investigation and security clearance procedures. The process could take several months to complete and would involve detailed interviews with federal investigators who would examine every aspect of her personal and professional life. The thoroughness of the investigation was necessary because graduates of the program would have access to highly classified information about special operations capabilities and procedures. Sarah was given time to consider the offer carefully. While the opportunity was extraordinary, it would also involve significant commitments and responsibilities that would extend far beyond her current role as an emergency room nurse. She would be expected to maintain her readiness to respond to emergency calls at any time, and she would need to participate in ongoing training exercises to maintain her qualifications. The decision was not one that Sarah took lightly. She thought about her family, her current job responsibilities, and the potential impact that accepting such a role might have on her personal life. At the same time, she recognized that this was an opportunity to serve her country in a way that few people ever could, and to use her nursing skills to support the men and women who put their lives at risk to protect American interests around the world. After careful consideration, Sarah accepted the offer to enter the specialized training program. Her decision was motivated by a combination of professional ambition, patriotic duty, and genuine admiration for the courage and dedication she had witnessed in the 4 SEALs she had treated. She wanted to be prepared to provide the best possible care to other warriors who might find themselves in similar situations. The formal meeting concluded with Commander Patterson presenting Sarah with contact information for the program coordinators and a schedule for her initial security clearance interviews. The process would begin within 2 weeks, and if everything proceeded smoothly, she could expect to begin the actual medical training within 3 months. The timeline was accelerated due to the urgent need for qualified civilian medical professionals in the San Diego area. As the SEALs prepared to leave the conference room, each of them took a moment to say a personal goodbye to Sarah. Their words went beyond simple gratitude and expressed genuine respect for her professionalism and character. They explained that knowing there were people like her in civilian hospitals made their dangerous work feel more worthwhile, because they knew that quality care would be available if they needed it. Petty Officer Chan, whose injuries had been the most serious of the 4, was particularly moved in his farewell. He explained that Sarah's gentle care had reminded him why he had chosen to serve in the military in the first place, to protect people like her who dedicated their lives to helping others. Her compassion and skill had reinforced his commitment to his dangerous profession. The SEALs left the hospital in the same coordinated manner in which they had arrived. Their departure was as subtle and professional as their presence had been throughout the day. Within minutes, the conference room was empty except for Sarah and Commander Patterson, who remained behind to handle the final administrative details of her recruitment into the specialized program. Commander Patterson's final conversation with Sarah focused on the broader significance of what had occurred that day. He explained that the relationship between special operations personnel and civilian medical professionals was one of the unsung partnerships that made American military effectiveness possible. The knowledge that quality medical care was available in civilian facilities around the world allowed special operations teams to take calculated risks that might otherwise be unacceptable. Sarah's role that day had been part of a much larger network of civilian professionals who supported special operations in ways that were never publicized or formally acknowledged. From the mechanics who maintained aircraft used for clandestine missions to the communications technicians who ensured secure contact with remote teams, civilians played essential roles in protecting American interests around the world. The commander emphasized that Sarah's discretion and professionalism had been as important as her medical skills. The ability to provide quality care while maintaining operational security was a rare combination that made certain civilians invaluable to the special operations community. Her performance had demonstrated that she possessed both the technical skills and the personal integrity required for such responsibilities. As Commander Patterson prepared to leave, he shared one final piece of information that helped Sarah understand the full significance of the day's events. The mission that had brought the 4 SEALs to her emergency room had been instrumental in preventing a terrorist attack that could have resulted in hundreds of American casualties. The intelligence they had recovered during their dangerous operation had led to the arrest of several terrorist operatives and the disruption of their planned attack. This revelation put Sarah's role in perspective in a way that was both humbling and inspiring. Her nursing skills had played a small but essential part in protecting innocent Americans from harm. The wounds she had cleaned and bandaged had been sustained in the defense of people who would never know how close they had come to being victims of terrorism. Commander Patterson left Sarah with a final thought that would stay with her for the rest of her career. He explained that the difference between ordinary service and extraordinary service was often found in the willingness to do exceptional work even when that work would never be publicly recognized. Sarah's performance that day had exemplified the kind of quiet heroism that made America's defense possible. Sarah remained in the conference room for several minutes after Commander Patterson left, reflecting on the extraordinary turn her routine shift had taken. She thought about the 4 young men who had risked their lives for their country, the recognition she had received for simply doing her job to the best of her ability, and the opportunities that lay ahead as a result of her involvement in their story. When Sarah finally left the hospital that evening, she carried with her a new understanding of the impact that her profession could have beyond the walls of any single medical facility. Her nursing skills had intersected with matters of national security in ways she had never imagined possible, and she had been given the opportunity to expand that intersection through specialized training and ongoing service. The commendation letter and challenge coin that she carried home that night were tangible reminders of an extraordinary day, but more importantly, they represented recognition that her dedication to helping others had been noticed by people who understood the true value of such service. Her commitment to providing excellent patient care had earned her a place in an extended family of Americans who worked quietly to protect their fellow citizens. In the days that followed, Sarah continued her regular nursing duties while beginning the process of obtaining her security clearance and preparing for the specialized training that lay ahead. She found that her perspective on her work had been permanently changed by her encounter with the Navy SEALs and their commanding officer. Every patient she treated was now viewed through the lens of her expanded understanding of service and sacrifice. She recognized that her role as a nurse was part of a much larger network of people who contributed to the safety and well-being of their communities in ways that were often unrecognized but always essential. Sarah's story became a reminder that extraordinary opportunities can arise from ordinary dedication to excellence. Her willingness to provide the best possible care to every patient, regardless of the circumstances, had created an opportunity to serve her country in ways she had never imagined. The 4 SEALs who had entered her emergency room as mysterious patients had left as reminders that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest honor comes from being recognized by those who understand the true value of selfless service. The memory of Commander Patterson addressing her as "ma'am" with genuine respect and gratitude would remain with Sarah throughout her career as a powerful reminder that dignity and honor are found not in titles or recognition, but in the commitment to serve others with excellence, integrity, and compassion. Her ordinary shift as an emergency room nurse had become an extraordinary chapter in her life's story of service to others.